Good morning, everyone. I'd like to just start by saying that I'm super pleased to be here. It's not often that I'm in a room with a lot of other people who, like me, truly believe, and are passionate about AI. So kind of milling around this morning and seeing a lot of people, hearing a lot of people talking about what they do and hearing people that sound a bit like me, it feels good. As you guys will know, this is the finance track, and so I think all of us sometimes feel like aliens in our own organizations. And certainly it's a pleasure to be around so many other like-minded people today. So what I wanted to talk about today is the entire subject of this conference, which is artificial intelligence. And I know that all of you know, but AI is not a new concept. As foreign as it might seem to some of our institutions, AI has been around for a really long time. So whether it's the start of the Turing test in 1950, it's in 1956 when we actually coined the term artificial intelligence, and since then there's been countless research, development, commercialization of AI, all the way to now, where we have a multi-day conference in Las Vegas around AI, dedicated specifically to this topic. So it's very clear that we've come a long way, and we've been talking about AI for almost a century now. With that said, I don't know that anybody would say that AI has radically changed your day-to-day. So certainly in social media and some of the kind of digital native industries, we have seen a lot of progress, and certainly in our search results, in news results, in our smart assistants, we are going to see so much more, and it's already impacting us today. But the last time you went to the DMV, did you feel AI there? I certainly didn't. As I went through customs coming down here, I did not feel AI once. And certainly if you think about your latest interaction with your bank, I don't think that you would feel that AI is there either. So there's still a lot of work for us to do to make AI real. And certainly in our history over that century that I talked about, we've had a lot of expectations and disillusionment. So we had 2 AI winters, I think that's what they're actually called, where there was a huge promise, lots of investment, and all of that was taken away. Why? Because the promise did not meet reality. So as we think about how we actually make this real, especially for organizations that are going through a huge amount of transformation, including in the financial services industry, and I would state perhaps especially in the financial services industry, there's a lot of work to do to make it real for everyone else. It's very real for us, but not so much so for everyone else. How can we bridge that gap? So at my organization, there were a couple of things that we had to do, and we learned this many years of fits and starts. So for those of you who don't know Scotiabank, we are the 3rd largest bank in Canada. And if you guys know anything about Canadians, we're very nice, and we don't necessarily make big bets. And in the banking industry in particular, it's quite protected in Canada. We don't have quite the level of competition as we would have in the US, so things move a lot more slowly, a lot more conservative, maybe a bit more regulated, and certainly not necessarily the first adopters of any new technology. So as we thought about how we would integrate data and analytics into the way that we conduct business, we failed in the same way that many people fail, which is we went out and looked for the very best person in analytics, the very best person in data, the very best person in technology, and kind of set them up and said, go and do your thing. We did not integrate that individual or their teams into the business of banking. So they were excellent in their field, and wretched in being able to integrate into process, into technology, into things that make it real. So what we did over the last couple of years, and I just joined about a year and a half ago, is focused entirely on making AI less artificial for our stakeholders, for our institution, and hopefully for our customers as well. And what that means is bringing AI closer to banking. So when I say make it systemic, what we've done is not necessarily or we did not focus on being the very best data and analytics company. We focused on integrating data and analytics and technology together to reduce the amount of friction it takes to be able to conduct data and analytics within banking. And that usually comes with operating model change, and in our case, organizational change. And I'll get into that in a moment. But organizing yourselves so that you can reduce the amount of friction and just make it easy for people to do analytics, to consume analytics, and ultimately to benefit from analytics. The second is to make it relevant. Sometimes it's very easy for us to get really wrapped around an axle around things that are interesting to us. So whether it's a new research paper that we've read that we really want to try out that new methodology, whether it's in making it absolutely perfect from a technical perspective or very sophisticated, perhaps too sophisticated for the problem at hand, sometimes we focus on the wrong things. So making sure that we're ascribing every single one of our use cases to value, to business value and to business process has been key for us to be able to continue to drive forward our agenda with people who might not necessarily fundamentally understand the value of analytics or data at their core. And the last is making it accountable. AI is still something that people fear, and I don't think that Hollywood has been our friend in this regard. And certainly if you look up AI, there are dystopian futures painted in every single one of the documentaries that I've seen. You know, whether it's HAL or any other AI that's been in the media, you know, it's not painted very favorably. So we do have a duty of care to ensure that we're being transparent and we are being explicitly ethical about AI and making sure that the rest of the organization understands that. So the first is making it systemic. So I think if anybody's in AI or analytics in this room, I don't think that anybody would say once that it is easy to do. If I asked you to go out and build a data pipeline for an AI model, I can see the groans already building in this room. It takes a lot of time to go out and find the data, make sure it's the right data, make sure that it's systemic data. And gosh, if you wanted to embed that model that you built, that beautiful model that you built, into an actual process, working with your technology partners, both sides of the table would start to get very anxious about the size of the project, the resources required, and the difficulty of integrating into legacy systems. And if you think about the way that data analytics and technology are currently organized within your own organization, where do they sit? The answer is not consistent, for sure. Sometimes they sit with the CTO, the CIO, the CRO, the CFO, the CMO. There's not really a home for data analytics and technology that's consistent across the industry. Nor would you say, at least consistently, that they are housed under the same roof, which means that they have different priorities, they have different objectives and incentives, they have different leadership, they have different roadmaps, which means that the flywheel that we should have between technology, data, and analytics never gets realized. Because technology is the only thing that creates data, right? Data is necessary for modeling, and models don't do anything until they're reintegrated into technology. I say this often to my own team: an AI or a model that is simply the model is a brain in a jar. It's super smart and it does nothing. So all of this together is the only way that AI starts to become more real for our employees, for our customers, and for our shareholders. And until we are able to, and we forced it through an organizational change, connect all of these from an organizational perspective, from a goals perspective, and from an execution perspective, we will consistently find that there's at least leakage in the value that we can create, if not a complete failure in creating value for the organization. So, you know, if I had to point to one thing that has made us successful, both at inspiring our stakeholders around the organization to truly believe that analytics has value for the organization, but also to see it in our financial results, it would be this structure right here. Making sure that we have a chief data officer, a chief analytics officer, a chief technology officer all working together, and in fact, all working in the same organization. I'm the chief data and analytics officer for our bank, Within my organization, I have connected roles for data analytics and technology that support all of our business lines and all of our corporate functions. And they are united. Their goals are exactly the same. And those goals are oriented not on how many models we built, but how much they are consumed and how much value we've created for the organization. And in fact, our incentives are completely aligned to our business partners. We get measured on revenue, customer experience, cost savings, just like everyone else. Making it relevant, I think, I did spend quite a lot of time on my soapbox about this earlier, but I do find that sometimes we get a little bit caught up in either being reactive to the requests of the business, which tend to be BI and data related, or we get too caught up in our own objectives of doing something cool. So the way that we think about it is very, very simple. And our objectives for our organization, outside of creating value, is to make sure that we are progressing each one of these three objectives for the organization. So the first is to know better. I think everybody in each one of our companies would agree that analytics drives insight. And that's a really great thing. So whether it's in reporting, whether it's in segmentation, whether it's in any of the other things that we do to provide better information for our companies, that's, I think, where everyone can agree analytics delivers value. Where we sometimes fail, though, again, back to the brain in the jar, is that we keep the brain in the jar, and it's not necessarily connected to a process or into automation that allows us to make it easy for that insight to make it into different action. So a lot of the work that we need to be doing going forward, again, to make artificial intelligence feel less artificial, is to do better or to scale automation across the organization. And this is where that flywheel between data analytics and technology becomes so important, because as everyone in this room knows, automation is simply models that have consistent data pipelines feeding them into business process driven by technology. Very, very simple. But there's no silver bullet to making sure that you have the right technology infrastructure to scale better. So again, the fact that it takes a year to get through model validation, to get all of the data pipelines built, to make sure that we have lineage, to make sure that we have all of the things that we need to do to be able to scale a single process. If you imagine doing that, especially with the on-prem architecture that many of us are dealing with, myself included, it becomes very difficult for us to be able to, again, deliver more value than a couple of use cases. So a lot of the work that additionally we need to do, and that partnership with technology becomes very important for us to be able to scale to the size where we have hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of models running at any given time, versus what we probably currently have, which would be in the tens or hundreds. I'll learn this eventually. And then the last is making it accountable. So I think anybody who has been part of AI initiatives, at least over the last couple of years, has faced additional regulatory scrutiny, has faced a lot of questions internally as to how do we know that there's no bias. The Goldman Apple incident was not our friend, but it was a wake-up call for all of us to make sure that we are accountable for the work that we do. So I think, and it's a track actually in this conference, how do we think about ethics in AI? How do we make sure that we're protecting our customers and our data? And that starts with setting the tone. So certainly we have a lot of standards that have been published. We have a lot of institutions, regulatory bodies, and others that are asking us to write policy, to ensure that we have a response to the question, hey, are we doing the right thing? How do we know? However, what I'm finding is that walking the talk is so much harder. So how do you control for every model that's being built across your organization? How do you ensure that every single person is asking the right questions of that model? If I asked a question now, just by a show of hands, how many people are dealing with a lot of attrition or retention issues? Hard to hire? Lots of turnover? Yeah. So when you think about all of the people who are really skilled in AI and the fact that we are turning over I had a 30 to 40% vacancy rate at some point over the last year. How do we make sure that all of these new hires are operating with the standards that we expect out of all of our data scientists? very difficult when you have a distributed model. So what we've done is actually put in place processes that ask a very onerous set of questions, to be frank, but do ask a consistent set of questions that are half business rules, half AI-based around the safety and soundness of the data that we use in our models, in exactly how it's being used, what the scope is, and to document all of the decisions that we've made in order for us to feel comfortable that not only are we consistently applying data ethics across our organization, but that we have an ability to measure our success, track our progress, and hold ourselves accountable. So that the tracking of progress is not only good for us to make sure that we're doing the right thing, but also for us to educate the rest of the organization on how important it is and what those impacts are. So there are plenty of challenges ahead, and I'm sure that as we look at the opportunity, we are simultaneously faced with a lot of the constraints that come when everybody recognizes the opportunity at the same time. So certainly the pandemic was a really great wake-up call for all of us to digitize. That means that we have a huge talent shortage. And this is across the board. It's not just in AI or data science. It's in technology. It's in operations. It's in frontline staff. You know, we are across the board facing a lot of challenges that will prevent us from being able to move forward in any real way unless we start to prioritize and get focused. You know, I'll close I'll close with a few points that I'm going to be personally focused on with my organization over the next year or two. The first is around expectations. So I don't know if you guys also have the same stakeholders I have, but AI has become a verb. Just AI this thing, and I'm sure it'll be fine. And you know, while that might sound good, that is exactly what got us in trouble in our first AI winter. We did not set expectations about what it is that AI can and should do given our current technology constraints, as well as the process changes and their accountability as users of the product of AI to integrate it into the way that they work. So setting expectations for what AI can reasonably do, as well as the expectations that we have of them as users, is something that has been a major focus of mine. And certainly in a past panel that I participated in, a lot of the talk about what's going to be the major difference between success and failure in AI going forward was around change management, around culture change, around education, and ensuring that people don't see AI as a science project, don't see AI as a foreign or alien concept or something that's very abstract. Every single one of the questions I get in my internal panels is, hey, can you help to explain AI? AI and data seems very foreign to me. Can you explain it in real terms? Being able to do that and having them understand that AI and data is not my job, it's actually everyone's job. To be able to produce, to be able to explain at least illiterate. So education, training, making sure that people feel part of AI as opposed to a user of AI, it makes a huge difference in terms of the ability for us to change operating model. And the last is engagement. So I think it's very easy for us to be driving some of these transformations in a silo. It's much faster, quite frankly, to do so, to be able to do a model or two, skunk works, just get it done, make sure that we're creating value. And that works, and we should continue to make progress and not let perfection be the enemy of the good enough. However, making sure that we are engaging everyone, whether it be compliance, technology, process, operations, the business lines, the channels, our frontline staff, every single one of them need to be part of this journey together. Otherwise, you know, there's an old saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So being able to bring the entire organization together around this common purpose with the right expectations and the right education is, I think, the next frontier of where AI is going to go. And I think I'm very encouraged and optimistic about where we're going to head as an industry using AI going forward. And with that, I think I'm getting the signal that I should probably close up here. But you know, it's been a pleasure speaking to you guys, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the sessions today. I think they should be really interesting.